All right. Hello and welcome to the Aberdeen Scan as a writer panel. I'm Bradley, the moderator, and I'm here with our amazing panelists, Cass Kim, Justin Manzano, J.R.H. Lawless, and Robin Sullivan. Hi.
Hello.
Howdy, howdy.
So now let's start with the introduction. And we will start with Cass. If you will please introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm Cass Kim. I am an author, an editor, also a speech language pathologist, and I've done a lot of freelance ghostwriting as well. You can find my books on Amazon and in some of your local bookstores.
Okay. Justin?
Hi, I'm Justine Manzano. I am a YA author. I am an editor, and I'm actually the editor in residence here at Right Hive. All of my stuff is available at justinemanzano.com.
All right. Robin?
Yeah, hi. My name is Robin Sullivan. I am the wife of author Michael J. Sullivan. He's a fantasy author who has worked with Orbit, Del Rey, and also does self-publishing. He's been on the New York Times a couple of times, the USA Today. And I basically handle a lot of the contract stuff and also any of the business related stuff. And so he thought I might be better equipped to answer some of the questions on this panel.
All right. And lastly, Jay.
Hey, so yeah, I'm sorry, coughing currently. I'm J.R.H. Lawless, coming to you currently from unceded Beothuk and Mi'kmaq territory in Atlantic Canada. I'm a lawyer by day, and for my sins, I'm a repeat offender as a debut novelist in the middle of the pandemic in 2020 with my two debut novels, Always Greener and The Rude Eye of Rebellion, which both came out last year. So as a lawyer, but also actually as a, I've been lucky enough to participate in GriefCom, which is a big part of what SIFWA does to help protect, specifically protect writers, both long form and short form, against either scams or poor practices from publishers and editing houses. So it's yeah, this is really a vital subject, and I'm really looking forward to getting into the nitty gritty of it with everybody.
All right. So now let's start with the question. So first of all, what are some major red flags to look out for in an agent-writer relationship? We will start with Robin.
Okay. I'm sorry, in the writer what relationship?
Agent-writer relationship.
Sure. So the most important aspect, I think, when dealing with an agent is whether they're asking you to pay money. Agents receive their payments as a percentage of the sales that they do to the publisher. So if an agent says to you, I will be your agent, just send me $1,000 and I will represent your book, that's generally a scam. In general, agents will take 15% of whatever your contract is if it's a US contract, and 20% if it's an overseas. Because in the overseas markets, there's generally two agents, one in the country of the publication, and they get 10%, and then your co-agent, if you will, gets 10%.
All right, Justin.
Hi. Okay. So one thing that I can think of is that a lot of times you have agencies kind of sprout up overnight, and that's definitely something you should look out for. An agent who has no web presence or who is suddenly liking things in these pitch contests, you have to be very careful, because if they don't have either a background working with a major agency or some kind of mentoring behind it, they're not going to be able to provide you with the kind. They may mean well. I mean, they may totally mean well, but they may have no idea how the business works. And that is yet another reason why they may not be able to provide you with what an agent is supposed to provide you with. So you want to be careful not to sign, or not to get too excited and sign with somebody that may not even know the business that well.
All right, Jay.
Yeah, obviously amazing advice there so far. I suppose as a practical hint, might be the first time of many that I will be referencing this website, which is why I actually put it as my background, which is Writer Beware. And it's the single best place you can be going for just about any of the questions we'll be talking about tonight. There are lots of other ones, but if there's only one to remember, it's Writer Beware. Specifically for agents, they have an amazing list of schmagents, as we tend to say, sham agents. Questionable practices, and then some of the stories of the situations and basically the abuses that they've called out and had immediate change on is it's you couldn't invent it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cass?
So I'm actually like the self-publishing person in residence at Right Hive, so I have very limited agent experience. I would just like to say everything that they said is absolutely logical, and I totally agree. And that's all I've got.
Okay, all right.
Okay. Can I do a quick?
Oh,
Go ahead, Justine. Go ahead, Justine.
One thing I was going to say was that also another thing that I've seen crop up is people who make offers really, really quickly on books, like 24 hours. An agent submits their book and then all of a sudden 24 hours later, they're getting offers. They don't know specific things about your book. Like, you should be able to have a full conversation about the entire outline and plot line of your book. And if you can't have that conversation, they can't tell you what their favorite parts are or things like that, or suggestions for changes. If they can't have that conversation with you, then they're not even really reading your book. They're just kind of skimming it and then trying to sign you to make money off of your book, which again, it implies that they don't have the ability to actually, or the know-how in the industry to actually sell your book. So that's something to look out for.
Right. And I just wanted to add, and this might have actually come up into a different question, but it's kind of it's related to agents and it's related to contracts, and that is, you want to make sure that there's an easy way to get out of a contract with your agent. You don't want to be married to them for life, but it has to be reasonable, right? Like you can't have them be in the middle of pitching your books around, and then you say, you know what, I'm walking away from you, because they're like, dude, I'm still working on this, like give me another, 2 months to see this through, to see if I can get any of these nibbles to turn into something. But what I have seen a lot of authors get burned on is that a lot of times there will be language in the contracts with the agent that says if they ever represented a book, even if they didn't sell the book, but if they ever represented the book, then if it does sell, they get 15%. Which is a real problem for you, because what generally will happen when you leave an agent is you'll go to another agent and they'll want their 15%. So now you're being double dipped. You're essentially having to pay 30% for that particular work. So what you want to make sure of is that it's only work that they physically sell that they get payment on. And you got to watch your language very carefully in your contract. And this isn't necessarily a scam. This is one of those industry things that people don't really look at. And I've seen, I've looked at a lot of people's agents' contract, and they're like, I broke up with this agent and now they're saying I owe you money. And I said, well, I don't know, send me your contract. And I said, well, yes, you do owe them money. You should have never signed the contract with that in there. You should have been very clear that in order for them to receive payment, they have to do the deal. Now, again, if they were just about to cross the finish line and you pulled from them, then you probably still do owe them that money. I mean, you can't just say like, oh, I know you did all this groundwork, but now I'm going to leave you and sign the contract with that publisher myself and cut you out of the deal. You can't do something along those lines. So just make sure that it's very clear what happens when that relationship goes bad, or when that relationship ends, and that, yes, you have to pay them for stuff they sold, but no, they don't kind of get a quick claim deed on something just because they tried to sell it and were not able to.
All right, thank you. Next question. What are some publisher contract red flags? We will start with Jay.
Publisher contract red flags. That's a biggie because as soon as you talk about that, you're talking about the risk of vanity presses for starters, because that's the single biggest scam and predatorial practice with all of this. Same for agents, just bringing it back a little bit, but exists because there's a power imbalance. You have so many authors who are so passionate about what they do, and rightfully so, and pour their heart and soul into a work, convincing themselves it's the work, and that's a whole other kettle of fish that deserves talking about. But and that they want to get their work out in front of people, get people reading it. And there's only, the system as it is set up, there is way more demand for agent services, for publishing services, than there is offer. So like any economic system, you then have this power imbalance where the system is ripe for predators. And a lot of these authors coming in, maybe folks listening to us are part of them, are newer to the system, can be in a relatively fragile situation, either economically or whatever, and certainly feel like they need that validation as well, which is a complete fallacy, but anyway, it's real. And so yeah, that's why these predators are there. So again, the rule of thumb, which will be the same for absolutely everything we're going to talk about tonight, money flows to the author, not away from the author. And that's the rule. That's whether you're in definitely in these publishing scams, and there are so many will say, oh yes, we're going to co-pay, it's a new model, we're breaking the mold.
Yeah.
No, you're not breaking anything. You're just trying to profit from people who are in a vulnerable situation. You're just scum. So basically, that's what it boils down to. Get advice if you can. Get help. Listen to that advice. Ideally, even though you're thinking this is your big chance. Don't pour your life savings into a thing where you're going to get. Yes, you'll get something in return, but it's something you could have done yourself 1,000 times better. Going properly down the self-publishing route, which is 100% valid way of doing things, but don't pay for the privilege of getting scammed.
All right. Justin?
I think another important thing to touch on is small publishers, because and that's where I actually have the most experience, simply because I have I'm working with small publishers now, and I also have been burned by a couple. And so there is some of this that I learned by fire. So nobody and in this entire industry should have a problem with you taking time to review a contract. If anyone is rushing you, pushing you towards the finish line, they are not there for your, they're not there for your comfort, and they're not there for you to be satisfied with the deal. They're trying to push it through before you notice something. And it's hard because as a writer, you can get, when your work is, someone shows interest in your work, you can get really jazzed about it. And then you end up taking leaps that you didn't realize were not the right move. And so you really do want to sit on that contract and think for a while. And it's funny because JR is the lawyer here and I'm the legal assistant. So my thought is always contracts are made to be negotiated. And so you should never be handling a contract and have somebody say, no, we don't change that. That's our standard contract. That's the way it always is. Yeah, that's not the way this works. There are some things that are going to be non-negotiable, and that's, within reason, but there are other things like you should be able to push in certain directions for some things. If someone flat out tells you no negotiations, you've got a problem. Another thing is that when JR says that the money always flows to the author, and we've said that a couple of times now, that's in everything. There are some things like marketing where you are going to have to pony up a little bit yourself when you're in small publishing. But if you're getting, if you sign a contract and then all of a sudden you have a publisher going, buy our marketing package, it's $1 gazillion, that is a problem. And you're going to want to really do your homework when it comes to research to see if that's the kind of, bait and switch that the publisher is pulling. Because the problem is also that small publishers a lot of the time are very new. They're started by authors who really want to help, but a lot of times they don't know the business well enough. Again, it's all about experience. And so you want somebody who is going to not only be in your corner, but know business well enough. So they have capital, they have a way to support you. You know, you're not going to be putting in all of your money to publish your book, because for that you can self-publish and then you can get all the returns too. So you definitely want to evaluate any small publisher that you're working with and make sure that they're able to be properly supportive of you as the author.
All right. Cass?
Sure. So I'll talk a little bit from the self-publishing perspective, because when you self-publish, you are still signing contracts with the places that you're self-publishing. So for example, like Amazon KDP, you are signing contracts with them talking about what's in your book, the contents of your book, how much ownership they have of that. And same thing for Ingram or anywhere else that you were to self-publish. So technically they're kind of your publisher, even though you're self-publishing, because they're your platform that you're using. So something to be aware of with like Kindle Direct Publishing is sometimes they'll do beta testing for things. If you're accepted into a beta testing, you will be signing a contract saying that you will not speak about it. There's like a current beta that I will not speak about going on right now. And I've had to remind people on social media that you sign a contract saying you're not going to talk about it. The problem with breaking those contracts with publishers like that is that, you know, where you self-publish is that they can completely ban you from the platform, and you have to really read the fine print, because that might mean that they don't have to pay you your royalties that are still pending, and your royalties can be pending for anywhere from like 30 days to 90 days, you know, like a whole quarter of the year, depending on the platform. So that's something to be aware of. Always really read the fine print before you sign something. I know it looks like, oh, anybody can self-publish. This is easy. I don't have to read this. I can just click through, but read it. You're going to want to read it. The other thing that I recently learned that was, I don't know if it's a scam so much as it's just misleading. In Ingram, you have the opportunity to discount your books for a wholesale discount to get it into bookstores. And you can set it anywhere from 30% to 55% wholesale discount. But what happens is Ingram actually distributes your book that way to like smaller bookstores, but the smaller bookstores are only getting a 25% discount depending on how far down the chain they are. So that means that you think you're giving this much money to the little guy, just like you're the little guy, and actually a big chunk of that money is going to that publisher. So that's just something to be aware of, and it takes a little bit of digging to find that. So I guess my biggest thing would be make sure you know what you're signing, and make sure you know where your money is going when you are putting money into anything self-publishing related.
All right, Robin?
Okay, so a couple of things. I completely agree with everything that Cass and Justine said, but I want to make just some slight modifications. Cass is absolutely right about when you're in a beta program and you sign a contract for that. Generally, when you're self-publishing, you don't have a contract, you have something called a service agreement, which is a little bit different, because a contract usually ties you in for a certain amount of time. Where a service agreement, you can always leave the service, and then your relationship with that particular self-publishing entity is over. So it's a little bit different. For instance, on and then related to what Justine said, absolutely, with a small publisher, lots of room for negotiation. I mean, that's one of the great advantages of a small publisher is you can negotiate things that you can't always get with a big 5 publisher. For instance, I have had several small publishing contracts that have a term limit. This contract is for 7 years. This contract is for 10 years. Those are great. I love term limited contracts. Very common in the overseas market. But when you are with the big 5, your contract is going to be for the life of copyright. Period. End of discussion. There is no negotiating that. There is not a person around who has a big 5 contract that can get anything other than life of copyright. Now, what does that mean? That means they own the rights to that book until you die, plus 70 years. Now, that sounds terrible, and it is, but there are caveats to that. And the biggest caveat to that is generally the book can go out of print. And in the old days, when books went out of print, it was very simple, right? Like they printed up 10,000 copies, they put it in the warehouse. When those copies sold, it was out of print. The publisher had to decide to either pony up more money to print it again, or they put it out of print, and then the rights reverted back to you. But we live in the digital age now, and we have ebooks and we have audiobooks, and determining whether something is out of print or not is not as easy as it one time was. One of the reasons why we were able to sign our rights for the Rayera books over to Orbit is because the first small press that I worked with, I made sure to change the contract so that it said that a book cannot be considered in print just because there are electronic versions running around. Okay, I made them tie the in print to there are physical books in the warehouse, and they could not be print on demand books. They had to do a print run. So that was me holding the publisher accountable to doing what they said they would do, which is they would print up these books and they would sell these books. And if they didn't live up to that, I got the rights back. And it was very good that I did that, because after we sold out our first print run with that very small publisher, I got those rights back. I sold them to Orbit for 6 figures. So that was a good thing to do. The number one thing, and this isn't so much a scam as it is a industry standard policy that you have to be very aware of. And that is something called the non-compete clause. Every Big 5 contract I've ever seen has a non-compete clause. I have talked to authors who said, Robin, I don't have a non-compete clause and I'm with a Big 5. And I've told them, go read your contract, because you definitely do. And then they go read their contracts and they go, oh, I didn't notice this was here. Why didn't my agent tell me about this? I said, because if your agent told you about this, it would muddy up the contract negotiations, and they were afraid that you wouldn't sign and they wouldn't get their commission. So what is a non-compete clause? Well, a non-compete clause in the nonfiction world makes a lot of sense. Let's say I write a book on how to code in the SQL language, and I sign that book to a particular publisher. That publisher does not want me to turn around and write another book on how to program in the SQL language to their competitor. It makes sense that they would want to stop me from doing that. Now, personally, I don't see why there should be a non-compete in the fiction world, because in the fiction world, if I write a book in the Rayera universe, and then later on I write another book in a different universe, or even in the Rayera universe, I'm expanding the readership. And therefore, I should be allowed to do that, because this is how we make money. We make money by writing more books. But in the very first Big 5 contract that we got, the non-compete clause said the writer shall not allow or let anyone else publish any books that may compete with these books without the written expressed approval of the publisher. My question was, what the heck is a book that's going to compete with your books? Is another Rayera book competing? I would think so. I would think that would be, and I can't have you telling me I can't write more Rayera books. Does that mean I can't write another fantasy book? Does that mean I can't write another fiction book? Does that mean I can't write another, what can I do? You do not want to put yourself in a position where every time this is a clause of the contract that extends beyond the contract to the rest of your writing life. So if that non-compete is not explicitly clear and what I call defanged, then it can be a real problem, because the way it was originally written to me was, Michael would have to come to Orbit every time he wanted to write a book and say, is it okay that I do this? And if they said no, he couldn't do it. And that would just cripple his career. So what we did with the contract is we made them narrowly define what non-compete, what competing was. And in his case, we said competing was any book that, and it's really ridiculous because they had this in clause 1, but that's beside the point. But any book that had exactly these words in it, in exactly this arrangement, that was considered competing work. And I said, fine. But you can't have, but there were some other provisions we put around that. And one of the provisions we put around that is we did allow them a window of exclusivity. Because what we said is, for a couple of months before a release and a couple of months after release, Michael won't be putting out other books during that, because they're going to have a marketing campaign and they're going to be pushing his books. and you don't want to have him self-publishing something else and, you know, kind of riding on that coattails. So I think having a small window of exclusivity is fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, when we came around to the Del Rey contracts, which were negotiated by our agent, she understood what we thought the non-compete should be, but she didn't clearly articulate that to Del Rey. So what Del Rey thought was during the entire period that these books, that this series was rolling out, Michael wouldn't write anything else in the world of Elan. Well, it was a 6-book series. It was being released 1 book a year. The contract was signed a year before the first one, and then the paperback edition would come on. So that would be like 8 years where Michael couldn't put out anything. And that's not acceptable. Okay. And my agent is like, well, no, this is all perfect. I'm like, maybe perfect for you, but we self-publish. So again, I had to work extremely hard to defang that so that we would still be able to do some other things. And because that particular contract was such a large contract, and because the agent had already kind of mucked up the waters by telling the publisher something that wasn't true, there were some finagling I had to do. One of the things we did was we released a book. I said to Michael, I said, if you can get this book written and I can get it edited by December, then it can be published in this year and it will be far enough away from the June release of the publisher's date so it won't interfere. And then we also had one title that, again, we self-published, and we did not put it out into the world. It was not on Amazon. It was not in Barnes & Noble. The only way people could get it was for us. And then their contract closed, and then I could put it on Amazon, and I started selling that. So the non-compete is the big one. The clause about being out of print, I already alluded to a little bit, but again, there is some wiggle room for negotiation in there, but there's not a lot. So personally, what I say, when you're trying to determine with your big publisher what is in print, you should probably tie that to dollars. You should say, if the book's not earning at least this amount of money, then it's really not in print, right? Like if it's bringing me $3, it's not in print anymore. I don't care whether they're $3 coming from ebooks or audiobooks or print books. If it's not making me money, you're not doing your job, okay? The problem is the publisher sets those thresholds pretty low, and they have not been very willing to negotiate those thresholds. I was talking to my agent about a very big deal she did. It was a 7-figure deal for a single book. And she wanted to raise the minimum amount per royalty period from $500 a royalty period to $2,000 a royalty period. So in other words, if the book wasn't earning at least $4,000 a year, because royalty periods happen twice, if it wasn't earning at least $4,000 a year, she wanted the rights reverted. The publisher said, no, it's $500 a year. No, I'm sorry, $500 a period, $1,000 a year. And if you don't accept that, we will cancel this 7-figure contract, you know. So you know, it's 7 figures, so she was willing to sign it. So what I'm saying is, yeah, you can finagle those around a little bit, but again, going to what JR was saying, the balance of power is such, you know, when they're offering you $500,000 for something, and you say, I want the out of print to be at $2,000, they're going to say, well, you don't really need it. You know, this is what it is, and that's the only thing that it is. The other thing that I have seen recently that people have to be very careful about, particularly self-published authors who are doing the hybrid model, where they'll have some contracts in the traditionally published space and some contracts that are self-published. There's a part of the contract. It's called the indemnification clause. And it's a very simple clause. It's basically saying, I, the author, testify that I wrote this book and I didn't libel anyone, and nobody else wrote it, and I attest that I did this. Fine, great. But recently, publishers have started putting in there, I, Michael Sullivan, indemnify that I wrote this book, and I will not release any other book until this book is released. In other words, this will be my next, I think that actually what they say it is, and this will be my next published novel. Okay. Now, in some cases that would be fine. That was actually in one of our contract, and I knew Michael had nothing written, so I signed it because I knew it wasn't going to affect me. But in a different contract with Michael, I knew he had another book that would come out before that one. So I needed to get that scratched out because it would have made it, going back to that Del Rey thing, it would have made several years until we could get that other book out. So you have to look for these things. You know, I say you always read a publishing contract based on worst case scenario, right? Like if something goes really wrong, what's going to happen? If something really goes wrong, they're going to tell me I can't write anything without their permission. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. So that's why I work on the non-compete. There's this little thing that my agents never pointed out to me, and the publishers didn't seem to care about it. But this is the type of thing I'm talking about. It had to do with editing. Now, in the contract, it talks about editing, and it says, you know, you turn the manuscript and you get a payment for delivering the manuscript. And then your editor will go through the book and they will suggest changes. And then you can either make the changes or not. Now, in Michael's contracts, he's always made it be very clear that he has final say over the book. In other words, the publisher can't come in behind him and change the words or change anything. He has to have the final say. And so I think in my little head of what goes wrong, well, what if him and his editor can't agree? What happens? So I read the contract very carefully. And what it says is, if the publisher does not release the book within 2 years of acceptance of the book, then the rights will revert. Okay. But my little head says, what if it doesn't get to acceptance? Now you have a book that's in kind of a no man's land, right? That clause about reversion does not happen until 2 years after acceptance. But the whole point is you and the editor are arguing, so you never get to acceptance. So now you're in a no man's land. And because you're in that no man's land, again, going back to JR's discussion about balance of power, what are they going to say? They're going to say, look, this book is in limbo. You will never be able to get it back. We will never have to revert it because we never got to acceptance. Now, do you really want to make those changes that you said you wouldn't make? And that puts you in a really difficult position. So again, I made a little change to my contract. I said, you know, because the original language was, if the author and editor does not agree, the publisher may cancel the contract. And I said the publisher must cancel the contract. So that way I was guaranteed that if for whatever reason, Michael and his editor couldn't agree on something, we would get the rights back and then we could self-publish it or sell it to another publisher. So there's a lot of these types of things. So I guess the moral of all this story is read every single word and make sure you understand every single word, right? There's a very famous story about the woman who wrote the Vampire Diaries. And when she got her big contract, it said it was a work for hire. Well, she didn't know what a work for hire was, and she signed the contract. And she wrote several vampire books. She created the world. Vampire Diaries. She created the world. She created the characters. It was all her creation. But then one day the publisher said, you know, that next Vampire Diaries books, we're going to have it written by someone else. And she said, well, you can't have it written by someone else. This is my character. I created this. This is my work. They said, no. This was a work for hire. And she says, I don't know what that means. It says work for hire means we own the intellectual property. We are paying you to write in the intellectual property. So it doesn't matter who created it. The contract you signed said it was ours, and we can make anyone write it that we want. So if you don't understand, you know, a term like work for hire or any legalese that might be in there, you know, another good one is, and JR, you might have to help me with this. It sometimes comes up in agents' contracts, and you have to be very worried about it. It's a party. Oh, it's basically when the agent says that they own a piece of your stuff. They're a party.
They're the agent of record.
No, agent of record is one thing, but it's like, oh, I wish I could remember it. It's like if you sign a contract with an agent that says they are a party, parties in joint tenancy. That's what it is. Yeah. That's what it is. You know, partners in joint tenancy. You're basically saying you have it physically, that term, you know, joint tenancy means you've actually given them 15% of your book. That 15% of the book now belongs to the agent. It's not that they collect 15% of the money. It means you physically cut your book into two parts, 85% and 15%, and you gave that to the agent. So again, a contract with, I should have brought this up in the agent thing, but if it said we are now partners in joint tenancy, I didn't know what that meant. I did not know what that word meant. I had to look it up, and I had to, talk to my lawyer friends. They said, "Oh, what that means is this." You wouldn't suspect that, right? You see this thing with agents is, "Oh, we'll be an agent in joint tenancy for this project." And you're like, "Oh, that sounds good." Not so good. So read every single word. Think about the ways in which it could go bad, and think through what would happen in those cases. And if there's any term, force majeure, force
majeure, and it's French.
Yeah. I still don't know what that word is. I've never had it in a contract. I've seen it in a few contracts, and like people show me their contracts, and it had a force. Say it.
Yeah. It would be like force majeure if you're talking sort of English. Okay. But it's force majeure. It just literally means in outside circumstances that are inescapable.
Right. So, and I said, I don't know what that word means, but you better find out what that word means, because, I can't tell you what it means, but you should know because it's in your contract.
All right. That was a complete question. Next one, which tactics do scammers use to trick the victim? Cass?
So I think Justine, when she was talking about the rush, I think that's something that we see a lot. And I think that's definitely something like, because when people feel like, oh, well, I gotta jump in and do this, or the opportunity is going to be lost, and what if this is my only opportunity? It just really puts that pressure on. I think something else is confusing wording, maybe not intentionally for some contracts, but definitely intentionally for others. So I would always recommend having a lawyer look over your contracts, because I'm well read, and I still find some of the legalese to be, confusing when I look at contracts. And I think probably most of us feel that way if we're not specializing in it. So yeah, I would say definitely like confusing language and time pressure would be the top two that I would name.
Robin?
So anyone, and it's not new in publishing, right? But anyone who's telling you something that's too good to be true, it is, right? I remember very early on Michael's career, this was before he got, I think this was even before he got published. We had someone send us a contract and said, and the way they started off the deal is, wouldn't you like to go on David Letterman's Tonight Show and talk about your book? And wouldn't you like to, wouldn't you like to fly around the country on book tours? And I mean, they just went on with like all this great stuff, right? And it's really pumping your ego, right? And it's like putting forth everything you ever wished for, like in a, as being a writer. Someone starts doing that, you got to be really concerned, right? So and Michael knew right away. He's like, yeah, this is gonna happen. But he wanted to like see, so he humored him. Yeah, send me the paperwork over, right? And in the very, very bottom of the paperwork, it said, we will offer public relations services for $3,000 a month on a yearly basis, renewable, blah, 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 and if you would sign that, they would say, well, yeah, we tried to get you on Letterman. It didn't work, but you signed this contract, and as long as we're trying, we're living up to our end of the deal. So whenever someone's like really pumping your ego, or just offering you something that's just like, like come down to reality, then right away that it's a scam.
Okay. Jay?
I think the single most important thing to keep in mind, the most telling sign, whether it's an agent, but especially a sham publisher, or even a small press that is not a legitimate small press that you want to be dealing with, the most telling thing is when they're trying to sell themselves to an author instead of selling their author's books to a readership. So immediately you look at it and you see, they're not talking about who their published authors are currently, what the books are, where you can buy them. There's none of that. All you've got is, we are so good and we're again changing the mold, new model and and, if you sign with us, exactly, promising you, the moon. But, if they're not selling books, then you don't want to sign on with them to sell your books. End of story.
Justin?
So I have run into the opposite of what Robin said, which is I encountered authors who have been, there's a dating term called negged. When someone like just talks about you negatively and then like shows interest and then you're supposed to like run to them. Well, I've seen that in publishing too, where, our services, you really need our services to make your book good. And so, it's really bad. However, we're willing to help you fix what you need to fix so that you can get published or so that you can get your book out there. Any of the or you're not really that great with public relations, but we can teach you how. And, then, throw some crazy dollar sign at you. And that's another thing that, you wouldn't think it would work to talk down at somebody, but because we're in a situation as authors where we're like just really looking for this approval from these, bigger companies, and we can get, it's easy to get caught up in that and go, oh, maybe I'm not good because I haven't, I've been sending to agents and no one's been, I've been getting rejection after rejection, which is just a thing that happens in the industry. But for a lot of people that can like really take a toll, especially if you've been doing it for a while. And then all of a sudden someone comes along and says, I know how to fix it. I saw an agent, well, it was a sham agency, but I saw someone come up, claiming to be an agent, and they said they guaranteed, and there's an editor too that did this, that said they guaranteed publication if this person, signed, or if people signed with them. They tweeted it on Twitter, and I lost my mind. I think I did some kind of crazy thread going, no, because I've been working as an editor for a really long time. And I have seen, I've done some pretty good work with people, and there is no way I could ever guarantee anything like that, because at the end of the day, the publishing industry goes by trends. And unless I can say, I guarantee you can self-publish this and probably get some sales. There really is no way that I'm like guaranteeing anything. And anybody who is probably full of it. So that's something, if anyone's promising you that they can fix something, it's probably not true. So
it just reminded me of something, and so I'll bring it up really quickly. There was one legitimate public relations company running around that guaranteed they could get your book on the New York Times bestsellers list, and they did. And everyone just skewered the authors who did this. But basically what they did is you had to pay them like $30,000, and they would actually go to the various stores that report to the New York Times bestsellers list, and they would buy up books. So you paid them $30,000 so they could literally fill a warehouse of your books. And sure enough, there were several books that got on the New York Times that way. You don't want to be found out for being the one that's how you got in the New York Times, but they promised it. They did deliver. It was very expensive and it was very shady. And I would think nothing. And I would just have no respect for any author who would do that. And so, when it comes out, and it will come out, it just doesn't look good on you.
I think one thing you really need to focus on when you're working with, a publisher or an agent is that, remember why you're doing this. Because writing, and I know there are some people who just think they're going to get famous off of it and they get lucky, but, for the most part, it's a slog. It's not an easy thing. You write, you rewrite, you rewrite, you rewrite. We're talking like 70,000, 80,000, 100,000 words, over and over and over again, rejections. And they pile up, and it can be difficult. But a thing that you always want to remind yourself of is why you are doing this. You're doing it because you want people to read your words,
Right.
and you think you have a story to tell. And so when Robin says about the publicist who, like, okay, but you're not selling it, though.
Right. Yeah. Nobody's read my book. Yay!
Yeah, it's like, at what point are you like you're just looking for some kind of accolade, and you're not actually earning that, or be like, your words aren't touching people, and that's what you want as an author. So just kind of, when you're going through these things, just keep reminding yourself, and that's a good point for just the fact that it takes a toll, and you get tired sometimes. And I know I've been doing this for a long time, and I just got published. So, sometimes along the road, there were days where I was like, I'm done. And, I had to remind myself, like, you're doing this for a reason, and this is why. And just make sure you check in with yourself every now and then and say, this is what I want. This is why I want it, and evaluate any choices you make according to those terms.
Right.
Right. Good advice, everyone. How can authors better protect themselves from being scammed? Jay?
That's a tough one, because you're in that vulnerable situation, exactly like Justine was saying, exactly like Robin was saying, and yourself as well, Cass, that you're in that that position of relative weakness, faced with this monolithic and often very arcane publishing industry that it's hard enough to discover. I think probably the only thing I could recommend is connect with other writers. There are so many opportunities out there. For me, it was Pitch Wars in a large degree was my big opening into, okay, there's this big alien thing, and there are some people who are a little bit further on along the hike up the mountain than I am, and can tell me what what it looks like, and how where the pitfalls are, and actually what this mountain is, because it was just completely foreign to me, as it is to pretty much everybody. So yeah, connect. There'll be loads of people who are happy to share experiences. Another cool thing, actually, just for gaining knowledge, which is again the fundamental protection, just get that knowledge. Other than being here today, which if you're already very much on the right path. Another thing I really recommend is the SIFWA mentorship program, specifically if you're into speculative fiction. I keep talking from my own wheelhouse. So science fiction, fantasy, horror. SIFWA does an amazing mentorship program that I've been really lucky to be able to participate in as a mentor 3-4 times now, where anybody, you don't have to be a member, you don't have to be published, but anybody at whatever stage in your career you are, you can get matched with amazing work they do behind the scenes to really match people really well, to get people the help they need and the advice they need when they need it to take their career to the next step, and to avoid all those traps and all those pitfalls. So again, that's another opportunity. Don't miss out.
All right. Cass?
So I agree, like reaching out to organizations or seeing what they offer for free is a really good way to do that. So there's like the Alliance of Independent Authors, there's Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. There's a whole bunch of them, and a large majority of them have things that you can access without being a member that will kind of do some of that fact checking for you. And that goes for pretty much everything. I mean, there's places you can see the different awards that you can enter, how they're rated for legitimacy versus just trying to get authors money and things like that. And connecting, because I can't tell you how many times in like a Facebook group for like children's book publishing, somebody will be like, oh, I had this agency offer me to publish my book for like $5,000. What do you guys think? It sounds really good. And everybody's like immediately like, don't do it. Like, so, if you ask people and you're willing to listen to what people have to offer as far as advice goes, that's going to go a long way. Sorry, I yelled into everybody's ears. Okay.
Justin?
So I have 3 ways to kind of avoid this, and one of them is what Jay and Cass said, which is network. get to know your fellow authors. There are a lot of programs, Ride Hive being one of them. There's, I have Ride Hive, I have Writer in Motion. Rev Pit was another one that got me talking to other writers. So now I have like several group chats of authors going on all the time, and I can always throw something in there and be like, or answer this, but throw something in there and be like, does this sound right to you? Like, am I just nitpicking? Or, and it helps. It does. I mean, one thing that is also true about this industry is the whisper network. And people don't really talk about it because it's whispery. But it's because we all know stuff about people that we've worked with, or things that we've encountered, or friends that we have, that'll tell us stay away from certain agents, from certain, editors, from certain situations. But we can't exactly go online and say, blank, very powerful agent is kind of a jerk. Or, this person can, sometimes, says things that are questionable and I don't feel comfortable. Or, that's not the kind of thing you can tweet publicly about, because then your career is just. So what the best way to handle something like that is with friends. And if you know these people enough and you can trust them, which over time you can do, you can kind of say, okay, well, don't send to that person, don't submit to that person, or don't submit to that editor, because I don't know, sometimes this happened, or I heard about this. And while sometimes people have to take that with a grain of salt, because there are people who just have personal issues with certain people, there are situations where that can be extremely helpful in dodging a problem. And also just to get advice. I mean, I've sat with a friend that I made through networking as she picked her agent, and had to choose. Thankfully, she was very lucky. She had to choose between a few, and sitting down and pros and cons and all of this, and that kind of thing. It's so helpful through every stage, from is this thing I wrote crap to how should I market this? I'm having trouble thinking of a good idea. Like, it's just so much more helpful to like have people to bounce ideas off of that you really trust. Another thing is research, because not everything goes through the whisper network, but there are people who post things online about their experiences. There are things that you can look into, publishers, now it's gone away, Publishers Marketplace. Yeah, you can look up agent sales, you can look up how successful that is. Like, if these things, these are important. Like, you don't want an agent who never sells to anybody, because one thing I've noticed, and this is something that is more of a, it's not really a situation where you're being scammed, but it's more of a, you could do this yourself. So if you're going to be signing away 15% of what you're making, you want that to be towards somebody who's going to get you a lot, like a big sale. You don't want that to be, you submitted to that publisher that takes submissions from writers, so I could have done this, and yet I'm giving you 15% of what I make. And there are a lot of agents who only are selling to these very small publishers. And that's the question. Like, you have to ask yourself, is it something that you could just do yourself? Like, why are you signing with an agent that can do the same thing you can do? So that kind of research is like, you have to put in, spend some time, Google, talk to people who've worked with like writers that publish with that publishing company, see how, like, especially particularly with small publishers, because it's, it's a little something to reach out to, your random house published person. But like with a small publisher who's a writer, like about on your level, and you can kind of go, okay, well, you worked with this person, how are they? Because that helps tremendously in making, smart decisions. And the other thing is just manage your excitement That sounds easy, but it's actually really the hardest part of this, I think, because it's such a huge thing. You're signing this book and you're so excited, and you might see red flags and go, well, but, and that don't, well, but, just because, and this is from experience, I have well butted about cover art in a publisher. I have, well butted about bad reviews that I've seen from people who work with a publisher. And what ends up happening is you're not the special one that doesn't have that problem, as much as you may want to be that person. And you end up falling into that mess and getting yourself tangled in it, and then being the one who writes the, oh my God, please avoid this person review later. So just, really just don't jump in with both feet. Be cautious and think it through and listen when people say it, but don't think that you're just going to come out unscathed if something has happened to a few people and you think it won't happen to you. As somebody who has, still has smoke coming off of her from the last time she got burned, just be cautious.
All right. Robin?
Well, I mean, it's pretty much been covered by everything that was said here. I mean, I can't really expound on it. And I think what I heard from all the panelists was, communication with other authors. And there are lots of places that can be done. I mean, there are a lot of private Facebook groups that, authors go on. And I heard several people say, when I heard someone say this on Facebook, I said, no, don't do it. And that's what they're there for. Your support network is there to warn you off. We belong, and you can make one yourself, right? Like, we belong to a very small network of I think there's probably like 20 self-published authors. And we just have a little Discord, that we run. And, someone says, I got this letter from this agent today. Did anyone else get one? And these are pretty high earning self-published authors. And lo and behold, like 4 of them out of 20 got the exact same letter from the exact same agent, right? So that just says, he's, and the letter is, I'm really excited about what you're doing, well, he's spamming people, right? So it, you can find these networks. There's all kinds of Facebook groups. But if you don't find one, start one, right? Like, start just talking to other. I personally find self-published authors are the most helpful and information sharing, like much more than traditional published authors, right? Like they're very, very willing to share. So if you get a good group of self-published authors together, you'll usually find someone who knows something about something, and and they can be that really good support network for you.
All right. What are some questions you should always ask an agent? Justin?
Okay, so definitely want to ask to speak with clients that they have signed, and even clients that are past clients. You want to know about how the relationship was, because a lot of people, they don't leave because they're unsatisfied. They leave because they've gotten a little too big for what that agent can do, and so they end up switching gears to a larger agent, or so you want to talk and see, what do you like, who can I speak with that has worked with you that I can then talk to about, how you work. You want to ask about their sales record. You want to know what publishers they plan to submit you to. Because they should have, if they're showing interest, they should have an idea of where they're thinking of submitting. So you want to see their thoughts on that. Ask them what their favorite parts of your story were, so that you know what it is they like about your writing. Because an agent is not signing your book; they're signing you in general. So, if they only like something that you did that was super niche in your work, and you don't normally do that, that could be an issue. And especially if you're weighing ideas, weighing agent offers, you want to know which one is best for your career. So you're going to want to narrow that down. You want to know how they became an agent. Again, like I was talking about earlier, there are people who are authors or, love reading. And so they say, I want to be an agent, and they make an agent page and they like start tweeting. And so you want to know what their past was. Like, why are you qualified? But don't say it that way, because that sounds terrible. But why are you qualified to sell my book, right? So how did you become an agent? Where have you worked before? Like, get an idea of like who they mentored with, because these kinds of connections, and it's something that I've seen that like I've heard an argument break out on Twitter about this, because Twitter is good for that. But they, everyone was like, oh, well, this person isn't a qualified agent. And how do you know that they're a qualified agent? And, someone came back who was one of those people who had just started a page like yesterday, said, well, I love books and I can help authors. And I was like, okay, but like, you need connections with big publishers. You need, or else we're in this situation again where they're doing something you could do for yourself. But there are all kinds of networks that need to be created, and those things happen through mentoring. And so if you have an agent who has never been mentored at or worked at a larger agency or a well-known agency, you got to question that, because you don't really know what their connections look like. You also just want to know like their communication style, and whether or not they're, if they're an editorial agent. Some agents like to edit your work before it goes out in submission. Some will just take what they took is what goes out in submission. And so you kind of want to know like what to expect there. But those are less scammy, avoiding questions and more just, how do I know what agent's right for me and my style and how I do things? So, you should have there's definitely like a list of questions that if you get that call, you should definitely like check with them and see all of those things so that you can evaluate.
All right, Robin?
Yeah, so I Justine just stole my little thing at the very end there. It's not a scam, but when you're looking at agents, it is like a marriage, and you got to kind of think about it that way. Now, personally, the first time I signed with an agent, I thought we were going to be with this agent forever. Like, I couldn't imagine like why we wouldn't be together. But you have to make sure that your personalities mesh, right? Like if you're the type of person who you want to hear from your agent a lot, you want to hear like everything that's going on, and they just don't happen to be very communicative, then that's not a good fit. Or likewise, if you want an agent who is going to be kind of a structural editor for your book, and if that agent just doesn't happen to do that kind of work, well, then again, it's not a good fit. It's not necessarily that they're bad. It's not that you want that. I mean, personally, when it comes to Michael's works, he doesn't want an editor. He always tells his agents, look, you don't have to worry about like reading my book and giving me editorial comment back on it. Your job is to sell it. Here's the book. This is what it is. I'll give you the rundown on it. And your job is to go out and sell it. I'm not here for you to hold my hand. I don't want you to tell me how great I am. I don't want you to tell me all these things. I want you to sell a book. But that's what he wants. A different author might want something completely different. The other thing that I will bring up in this respects, and I probably feel a little bit differently about this than like some people do, but because self-publishing has become very popular, and agents are losing work because a lot of people are self-publishing, they are actively looking for other revenue streams. And a really easy revenue stream for a lot of agents is they'll say, okay, I've taken on your project. I'm going to try selling it. I shopped it around everywhere. Couldn't get any nibbles. You know what? I have a ebook publishing engine within my agency as a service to my authors. And what I will do, since I couldn't sell it anywhere else, I'm going to take this, I'll make an ebook for it. I'll put it on Amazon. I'll get my 15%. You'll get your 85%, and life will be good. And a lot of people will tell you that's a right up scam, period of discussion, because an agent's only job is to sell your work, and it's not to, you know, like become a publisher. They're supposed to sell to publishers. They're not supposed to be to publishers. Me, I'm like, ugh, you know, I understand why they're doing it. I've seen people who actually do very good at it, because there's, you know, I find self-publishing easy, but a lot of authors do not, you know, and so, you know, for me, it's easier for me to do it myself than to pay someone 15% to do it. But for someone else, they might be like, yeah, I don't know anything about ebook formatting. I don't know anything about covers. I just don't want to mess with it. Yeah, go ahead. You take care of it. And it's worth the 15% for me not to deal with it. So I don't consider it a scam, but you know, again, you gotta know like what's in their head. If it's truly a matter of, look, I couldn't sell it anywhere, you know, you weren't going to make any money from this, so at least this is a way to get you some money. That is a little bit different than saying, you know, well, sorry, you know, neither one of us are going to see a dime from this, you know. So I don't know. That, to me, you know, that's a new avenue that's opening up to agents. Some people would say it's an outright scam. Other people would say it's a service. It really depends on what you're looking for and what your needs are. For me, you know, I tell my agents, you know, I actually had a publisher came to me, you know, who said, you know, who was going to take over a certain title from me. And I said, well, that's fine, but I don't need you for the ebook. So you can have the print rights and you can go off and sell those, but I'm going to keep the ebook rights, because there's nothing that you're going to do to the ebook rights that is going to make me any money. So, you know, I'm going to keep 75% rather than 25%, you know. Are you still in? And they said, yeah. And so, you know, it was all good. So, you know, that's just something new that's going around a lot. And I think people should be aware of it and think about both the pros and cons of rather having an agent, you know, who also has a electronic publishing arm, whether that is something you want your agent to be involved with, or if that's something you don't want your agent to be involved with. And I can make a case either way.
All right. Jay?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and thanks for bringing that up there, Robin. I think at the end of the day, it's all about that being clear and established up front, and knowing what you're getting into, what you're agreeing to. And that links with what I wanted to say, sort of in continuation of what Justine was saying. Everything was absolutely perfect. Everything was absolutely dead on with what you were saying there, Justine. In terms of communication, I think that the nub of the question there is expectations, so that you know what you're getting into, setting from the get-go, this is what I expect. And then, and I'm kind of talking from personal experience here, when down the line things don't necessarily go the way you were promised or the way you expected, then you can reevaluate, and you're in a position to say, well, you know, it's been a year since we've signed now, and I haven't spoken to you on the phone since we did the call originally, and what's going on, you know, and then we can set things up, or you know, to have, you know, those regular follow-ups, and to make sure the relationship is meeting expectations for both parties heading onwards, basically. So that's I think that notion of expectations is really important. The only other thing I could think of to add is with regards to subsidiary rights. So just like big sort of technical U-turn there, but subsidiary rights, what are they? They're everything other than the basic getting your book published, you know, whether that's print and ebook, essentially. The first one, big one, is audio. So audio rights, how, again, making sure that whether you're talking about with an agent or with a publisher, what those rights are, and if it's the agent, then they do that in-house. If that's done with somebody else, what their sales are in that domain as well. And then you get into the more sort of arcane subsidiary rights, mainly foreign and film and TV. And so foreign and film and TV, do they do that in-house? Do they do exactly as Robin was explaining? Is it done with, you know, some partnership with foreign agents, specifically this and that one that they work with, and then it's, you know, 10% each? Do they have an in-house film TV agent, or do they have links with a specific organization that handles that, and how that works as well? Those are all super important things to think of that you wouldn't necessarily initially come to mind when you think I'm signing with an agent to get my book published. There's a whole industry linked to the intellectual property rights of your work that you've created, and that you need to remain in control of and aware of. All of that side of things.
All right, Cass?
I'm going to pass for the sake of time. I think everybody did a really good job.
Can I just add one thing to what JR said about audio rights? I didn't bring this up before because it really didn't have a place, but since you mentioned audio rights, I'm going to bring it up. Audio rights are really, really, really important right now. I mean, like hugely important right now. Okay. We literally have 7-figure contracts for just audio. Okay. And we have many 6-figure contracts for just audio. It's a very lucrative part of the publishing. That said, again, publishing is an evolving field, right? And we're talking about like, oh yes, you can negotiate things but there's some things you can't negotiate. As of, I'd say maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I don't know exactly when, there was a major shift in, again, I'm talking big 5 publishers, not small presses. Small presses, you should be able to keep your audio rights. I can't see why you couldn't negotiate that right. But when it comes to the big 5, they will not sign a contract unless you are willing to give up the audio rights, because the audio rights is where all the money is at right now. Okay. So, and because because traditionally audio rights were not very lucrative. I mean, no one cared about, if you go back to when we first published in 2010, no one cared about audio rights. I mean, I sold my audio rights as a subsidiary deal for $2,000. Like, who cares, right? No big deal. Those same audio rights, they had a 7-year contract, right? And so they expired, and then they needed to renegotiate the contract for that thing that they paid $2,000 for. They paid $400,000 for it. Okay, 7 years later. All right. So very, very lucrative. But the publishers are not increasing the size of the advances to offset the fact that you now are required to give up your audio rights. In other words, if they were going to offer you $60,000 books for just print and ebook, they're still going to offer you $60,000 for print, ebook, and audio. Okay. And also, if you're self-publishing and you go off and sell your audio rights independently because they're lucrative, and some studio comes to you and says, I want to buy your audio rights, you have now locked yourself out of a big 5 contract. Because when you go to the big 5 contract and you say, hey, here's my book, you can have the print and ebook rights to it, but not the audio because I already sold those, they're going to say, oh, sorry, we are totally not interested. So the fact that audio rights were brought up, I just want to mention that there is probably not a bigger area when it comes to rights right now than audio rights. And so think very carefully about who you give them to and what cut you will get for that. Because just as JR mentioned, like a lot of audio rights are sold as subsidiary rights. Well, when something is sold as a subsidiary right, that pie gets cut up smaller and smaller and smaller. So what happens is Audible has a contract with the audio producer, and the audio producer actually buys the right from your publisher. Okay. So let's say Audible keeps 65% of the money. 35% of that money goes to the audio producer, and the audio producer says, oh, the contract I have with the publisher is 25%. So they take, 25% of that 35%, and that's what goes to the publisher. And your subsidiary rate contract says you get 50% of all subsidiary rights, and the publisher gets 50% of all subsidiary rights. So that gets divided again. So it turns out that you're actually getting 3.5% of the money from the audio rights, where if you were to sell that audio right directly to Audible Studios, you would be getting a much higher royalty rate on that. Or if you sold it directly to Recorded Books, who is the audio producer, you're going to be getting a much higher amount than if something sold through subsidiary. So again, when you're looking at those contracts, you might want to say to your publisher, like I'll give you the audio rights because I have to, but I won't give them to you as a subsidiary right. You have to produce it, because if you don't, I'm going to lose half my money, because that's what happens when it's a subsidiary right. And I know that's very technical, and I probably lost like a lot of people, but I wanted to at least bring that caveat up, because it is audio rights it's everything to our writing career here, at Sullivan Studios, right? Like we're all about the audio rights. That is the most important IP that we care about right now. If we never did anything with the ebook and print, we would live very comfortably off of audio rights. That's just the way it is.
All right. Do you have any resource for avoiding scam? I know, Jay, you mentioned Rider Beware. Do you have any others?
I was going to say that there, although this is a little controversial at the moment, but there's an account online for YA authors called YA Whispers. And it's basically like the Whisper Network come to life for young adult authors. There is they do say that they vet. They usually require a couple or a few reports of an issue before they'll even talk about it. And but they're completely anonymous, which makes people a little cagey about it. However, I think they have been spreading some really good information. I think they broke a recent agency issue. So that became kind of big news. So they might be a place to look out for if you're writing YA. Also, of course, Rider Beware, which is like the kind of the no-brainer to pay attention to, because Victoria does amazing work, and
Yes.
Definitely just keeps, I mean, she also vets everything that she hears as well, and probably takes a lot of flack for that, but she does put together an amazing list of things to look out for and people to avoid, and definitely want to check that out. That's kind of like a bookmarked page if you're working in publishing.
Jay, did you have something to add?
I think we haven't actually talked about a big side of the industry, which is short fiction, short stories. So just quickly, first of all, short stories are awesome. If you're a short story writer, I hope you've sticked with us through all of this long form discussion. I apologize. Even I think there's great resources, even just things like beyond groups, like if you're part of Codex Writers, again, if you're in speculative fiction, amazing, tons of information there. There are other great groups that you can be part of. As soon as you get that first pro rate sale, and then that opens up a lot of doors. But even before that, your basic resources that you're going to be using for identifying markets, Submission Grinder, Duotrope, those also can help you massively identify, even just through reports and through sales, and the fact that yes, they've been open so supposedly for submissions for a year, but nobody's answered. There have been markets like that I've dealt with in the past. Even though I'm mainly a novelist now, I still short stories are still very close to my heart, and there are a lot of resources you can get there as well.
Cass?
I think that they said really the main ones. I don't have anything really super specific to add to that, aside from just really, really looking into something before giving your work to it. Also, just if you're going to self-publish, really consider copywriting and doing your own ISBN as well. And I just recommend people look up the differences between getting the ISBN from like Amazon or having your own ISBN.
Yeah. And Robin?
I'm going to be like the real estate person, location. It's writer beware, writer beware, writer beware. I mean, really, it's really all I mean, it's the gold standard, right? I mean, that's where you go.
All right. So
I think Justine wanted to add something.
Oh yeah.
Another, like you were saying about Duotrope, and there's something like that for agents, right? There's
Yes.
Query Tracker,
Of course.
which is super helpful as far as like kind of tracking if you haven't heard from somebody in a really long time, like if you submitted like, 6 months ago and you're still sort of waiting, or my personal favorite, the rejection I got 3 years later, after I'd signed with a small publisher and it was already done. These kinds of things, like people will post about that. They, have anonymous accounts and they'll just sort of say like, submitted to this person at this time, and then they'll come back later when they get the rejection and just sort of be like, oh well, be prepared to wait for a while. But these kinds of things, like also behavior when working with an agent, things like that, they get posted on Query Tracker. And so when you look them up, you look up the agent there, that's another point of research too. Like if you can see like a record of what kind of things they reject, how fast they do, it helps a lot, like take that kind of panic off of you when you haven't heard from someone in a while, and then you look it up and you go, oh, they're not responding to anyone right now. Okay. Like it's not just me, it's just they're not answering. Or that kind of thing can help relieve some of the panic that comes with querying. So
all right, so we are at the end of this panel. So what we do, I will ask each one of you if you have any last advice, either for IVOD scam or for victims of scam, and then after that you will have a moment to plug whatever you want to plug. I will start with Cass.
Okay. I feel like everybody was really thorough. And I think probably the biggest takeaways are like really sleeping on things and asking for advice and doing your research before signing anything. Once your name is on that contract, it's going to become a lot trickier to make any changes or make any forward moves, even after you maybe have found out that this person wasn't as honest as they should have been. So don't put your name down until you've done your research. Do I plug now or do I plug after? No. Okay.
No.
So I am Cass Kim. I am a speech language pathologist as well as an author, and I would love it if you would check out my children's book series. It's phonological and articulation children's books, and each book is a fun, sweet, engaging story that focuses on a specific speech sound based on where it's formed in the mouth. I believe that with all of the mask wearing that is necessary in 2020 and 2021, that we are going to be seeing some changes in speech development for children, maybe a little bit more delays than typical because they're not getting the visual stimuli and they're getting less clear auditory stimuli. So these books are just a fun, simple way to work in extra speech practice into your daily routine at home where you're not wearing masks.
All right. Justin?
Okay, so my parting shot is if you do end up falling into one of these pitfalls, and it does happen to people, and sometimes they're more harmful than others, your career is not over. It'll probably be a little difficult for a bit, but you come out of it and then you're gonna start over again, and you'll find your feet and keep moving. So all of this can kind of make you feel a little bit like, oh wow, there's a scam around every corner, and if I step in the wrong direction, I'm gonna get a bear trap and that's it. But that's not the way it actually is. And while yes, you might hit a couple of pitfalls here and there, you will be okay. Just friends help, so make friends in the industry is a big one. So I am, again, Justine Manzano. I have a book out now called The Order of the Key, which is a young adult urban fantasy. And I have a book coming out in June, Never Say Never, which is a YA contemporary with a fantasy twist. And I'm here at Right Hive all the time. I have my own little cafe corner, so you can always pop into the, my table at the cafe and ask me any questions or anything. I mean, usually it's editing stuff, but I'm also just, my DMs are open wherever you find me, because I, know that they're, people need some guidance sometimes. So that's where you can find me. Go to the Word Nerd Cafe and to my little table.
And the awesome podcast.
Oh, and our podcast, yes.
Jay?
Yep. Parting words. On top of what was said, you like in the old, well, it's not old, it's the new, but the older series of the new Doctor Who, you are not alone. Because you aren't, I mean, was it last month or maybe 2 months ago when this shows, and you guys listening to us, there was a thing going around about harsh writer advice, other writers are your competition. No, other writers are part of the same market and we all develop it together. And more importantly, we're all there for each other at some level because we're all going through the same ish. So, it's you are not alone. And as Justine said, just like everything else in your writing career, you'll get rejections, you'll get failures, wear them as a badge of honor because they're the proof that you're doing it right. And just keep going on to the next thing and the next thing after that, and then that's the only way it ever works. Plug wise, in fact, I will start by saying that I'll put my money where my mouth is, that you are not alone. Get my pointing correct here. So at Space Lawyer SF, hit me up on Twitter if you have any questions, anything you want to talk about, directly or as a DM. My DMs are open, it's not a problem. Hit me up, and even sort of lawyerly questions, I'm happy to help. And in the meanwhile, if you did fancy some absurdist, politically minded science fiction humor full of weird etymology footnotes, there's Always Greener, which is my debut novel. The ebook should probably still be on sale for about 99 cents, if I'm not mistaken. So, why not take advantage of that? And then the sequel, The Rude Eye of Rebellion, which is a strict ripoff of Shakespeare, and I'm very proud of that. Feel free to pick that up as well.
All right. And Robin?
So my parting words are to realize that publishing is a business and that you have to treat it as a business and you have to think about it. Right. You have your creative side. You need to have your business hat on when you're dealing with, anytime you're approached with someone either for, representing your book or taking on your book, you're going to have to try and put that business hat on. Make sure that you understand everything completely. Make sure that if someone is saying something that sounds too good to be true, that it is, and never put pen to paper. I kid you not. I know a very famous science fiction and fantasy author who literally said to me, I did not read my contract because I have an agent and that's what I pay her for. And I just about dropped over dead, it's your signature on the contract. You have to make sure you understand it completely. If you don't understand it, talk to someone like JR who has, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but he is, SFWA has, some legal advice areas, there's a lot of places to go. Just do not walk into anything unless you are 100% sure you understand what goes on. Oh, look, Michael's jumping in.
I would just like to say that if you can't do that, marry someone who is incredibly capable and knowledgeable about all these things. And if you can do that, then you don't have to worry about all this other stuff.
That's true. Thank you, honey.
You want to plug it in?
Oh, I plug. Generally, Michael doesn't let me plug. Let's see here. So Michael has 17 books out. He has 6 books in the Riyria Revelations series. That's RIYRIA. 4 books in the Riyria Chronicles series, and 6 books in the Legends of the First Empire series. And coming in August will be the start of a new series called The Rise and Fall, and the first book in that series will be Nolan.
All right. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for watching this video. if your live panelists will be in the chat to answer any question. So happy Rai. Have a great day and a great life.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brad, as well for the awesome moderation.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Excellent.
I
Bye-bye.
appreciate it.